shaketh my head. All of Ultramarine is like has their head in their hands. They're like, for shame! Why? Why would you do this to us?
Not changing it. Look at it.
Why would you do this to us? Guys, I hate you. How dare you trick me? He's pushing it further!
Gaze upon my works in despair.
We're watching Ultramar, apparently? I've heard about this one. This one's the guy that's got like lots of clones.
Out there because people find Space Marines cool.
No, Ultramar is the planet that the Blue Boys come from.
If you missed the memo on that, then welcome to Warhammer 40,000. People like Space Marines. There's chapters out there to choose from with any theming and color scheme you can imagine, be they the lightning-fast White Scars, the rage-fueled Black Templars, or the Ultramarines, who are the best ever. I love them, they're great. But in spite of firmly believing that the greatest of them all are the Ultramarines, there's a few other chapters I quite like as well. For example, I like the Genesis chapter, who are Ultramarine successors. And today I'll talk about another one of those chapters that's caught my interest, the Swords of Ultramar, another Ultramarine successor chapter, because anything that comes from Gilliman's gene seed is just built different. A decently ancient chapter, even by 40k standards, they've been around the block to say the least. Battles with and against the Eldar, the Thousand Sons, and of course the Tyranids, these warriors have stood tall against the darkness of the 41st millennium and come out from it as acceptably mangled as you can ask for in this setting. So let's take a look.
For reference, the reason I thought it was the clone guys, the way it had it, the picture on the Discord looks like the chaos colors in the background, and it's like a light teal blue, and I thought that was the guy that has all the clones.
Look at these fellas and see what sort of shenanigans they've gotten up to over the last few thousand years. But before I begin, I should let you know that this video is sponsored by Focus Entertainment and Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2, like the actual game. The Purgation update is here, which means a whole lot more fancy things to do in this lovely game. There's a new PvE mission coming, a new secondary weapon, and more siege mode stratagems, which includes the Mutilith Vortex Beast as a boss. Fun things to deal with, and since Space Marine 2 is the fun kind of action game, I actually mean that unsarcastically. Go down to the link in the description and pinned comment, check it out now. The Swords of Ultramar come from one of the earlier foundings of Space Marines in the Imperium's history, suspected to be from around the 5th to 8th foundings. Immediately you might be wondering, how come they don't know? Well, records in the Imperium are already spotty, so forgetting who came from what or what exactly they were involved in is no uncommon thing. Some chapters
it's
haven't
understandable.
a clue who the Primarch their gene seed comes from even was. Forgetting when exactly they flopped into the galaxy isn't the worst thing by far, all things considered. That and the records of their early history were glassed by Baal Tan after engagement with them went horribly wrong for the Marines. More on that later. They were created with the intention of acting as a sort of forward response team for Ultramar, hence the name Swords of Ultramar. A sword kept to your side can't strike out at your enemies, and indeed, Space Marines held in reserve are Space Marines not taking the fight to the enemies of mankind. Though not directly controlled by the Ultramarines, of course, that'd be Legion building, and that's a big no-no. As you might expect, they would still work closely both with a chapter of their Primarch as well as other chapters in the area and the mortal governments of Ultramar. This is something that, in theory, the Imperium...
I still love looking at this star map. So this is the big, like, tear in like the void. I love how there's a little orc face right there.
Might not be a fan of. However, consider the map on screen
I
now.
like it.
You will notice that Ultramar is about as far across the galaxy from Terra as you can get before you hit the space between galaxies and presumably a whole lot of Tyranids. Macrog and Ultramar tend to be tacitly allowed to do their own thing, be it as a special privilege or authorities such as the Inquisition who might tell them off, quietly pretending they don't see anything amiss. With no particularly common or egregious gene seed flaws to speak of, the swords are given a bit of that leeway as well, as long as they don't start randomly summoning demons for some reason or other, which to my knowledge, they haven't, so all's well. Their earliest remaining records don't say much of particular note, though since again much of them were destroyed, there is likely more that we just don't know. Records of pacifying planets that were revolting from the Imperium to a chaos cult remain legible, as well as them being deployed to deal with minor Xenos species on worlds slated for Imperial colonization. While wiping out a few entire species might sound noteworthy, this is 40k. A good chunk of them weren't anything beyond Bronze Age Xenos, and remaining reports seem to indicate that they were deployed largely to expedite events rather than because Astartes chapters were truly needed. A bit of a waste in some regards, but that does feel like a very Ultramarine successor thing to do. You gotta get your 4X game colony ready ASAP, so if you need to bulldoze some guys who have just figured out how concrete works to make sure the planets are settled, then that's just what you gotta do. The earliest record of note is where that whole trouble with Baal-Tan comes into play. Maiden worlds are pretty valuable things. They're perfectly terraformed planets, with that being done via space magic to be rich in every resource you can think of, especially classically natural ones like exotic animals and plants. So the Swords found out what turned out to be one day and went, well, I mean, we might as well, right? Baal-Tan doesn't really like people doing that, though. That's their second least favorite thing, just behind occupying a maiden world and also killing all the Exodites present there if there are any. So they told the Swords to leave. The Swords responded by opening fire. Baal-Tan counter-responded by obliterating their chapter's fleet and turning their chapter homeworld into a marble. Yeah, this is what happens when you mess with the craft world allowed to take on 10 chapters at once and win. The Swords were decimated in the affair, their numbers reduced to a few hundred, and their chapter now a fleet-based one out of the intact battle barge Guilliman's Honor. It would take a while for them to rebuild, because much like 4X strategy game players, they have a bit of a hard time focusing purely on one thing. The Imperium always demands more.
Valid. I have that problem too.
More things being done, be it because mankind's realm must always expand, or because the Orc horde rampaging through a given sector doesn't really care if you're ready for the fight or not. By M37, however, the situation seemed to have mostly stabilized, albeit they did choose to remain a fleet-based chapter. Additionally, while as Ultramarine successors I can only imagine they weren't fans of them, it seems they've taken a page out of the Minotaur's playbook and prefer to deploy at full chapter strength unless it's completely unfeasible. 1,000 Marines all jumping you plus any auxiliary forces with them tends to be the kind of thing most people don't have an answer for, and it seems they don't want to be caught lacking by Baal-Tan again. This has turned them into a less versatile chapter, but the plus side is that when someone important from Ultramar casually mentions a problem needs to go away, they can ensure handily that it does. The next few centuries since the beginning of M37 were largely full of course, heroic but still fairly uninteresting affairs, all things considered. Wiping out a few orc was that might threaten Macragge eventually is kind of the galactic equivalent of mowing your lawn. People only tend to notice when you let it get out of hand, and at that point they're just going to be angry you let it get that untidy. Valiant service, no doubt, but not terribly interesting. On the planet of Keller's Rest, however, about halfway through M38, they formed a bit of an alliance with another group of Eldar, Iyanden. Craftworld Iyanden, as part of their prior to getting devoured history and using ghost mechs, had dedicated itself to scouring chaos wherever they found it, mostly in their corner of the galaxy, but they go out and about every now and again. On one such mission, the Chaos Space Marine warband The Chosen Slaughter had descended upon an Imperial Forge world, but the Swords of Ultramar had happened to be in the area thanks to either the will of the Emperor or complete and accidental luck, depending on how religious you're feeling. They had already engaged the Traitor Marines, but it was a close...
Depending on how religious you're feeling. I feel like the answer to that is yes.
Right. Iyanden took a look at the situation, and without warning, Guardians and Aspect Warriors began cutting through the traitor forces, turning woes in spite of the entire Swords chapter being present a close fight into a resounding defeat for Chaos. Given their history, once bitten, twice shy was the attitude the Swords tended to have with the Eldar, and indeed throughout their history they had since come into conflict with the forces of other craft worlds, including more incidents with Baal-Tan. But Iyanden tends to be the nice craft world, even to non-Eldar. They're the ones willing to work with the lesser races of the galaxy the most, and since fighting off an entire Chaos Marine warband with someone else tends to at least make you a bit more open-minded towards that someone, the Swords of Ultramar heard them out. And from there, they'd become the closest thing to best friends a human and Xenos alliance can look like. Crafter Iyanden would occasionally more or less leak the location of suspected traitor forces, particularly those in areas of the galaxy near Macragge, given the Swords' modus operandi. The Swords of Ultramar would in response blitz those forces, and if they felt they truly needed the help, or if there was sufficiently large concentrations of psyker nonsense, they'd call on Iyanden for a bit of backup. Quite the heretical relationship, you could argue. And yeah, this is...
I mean, kinda, but... I feel like the Emperor would approve.
Absolutely the sort of thing that could get the Swords labeled as heretics and their chapter slated for destruction. But if you had to choose a group of Xenos to do this with, Iyanden's your best bet. The Inquisition itself at various points had Inquisitors as representatives staying with families on Iyanden, for all that the more Puritan parts of the Inquisition probably didn't know about it. The Swords seem to have kept it hidden by virtue of the fact Iyanden is still Eldar and therefore knows how to be sneaky and schemy as needed, as opposed to walking into Macragge and politely asking the first Space Marine they saw if the Swords happened to be in the area for a quick round of drinks at the pub. It does make me wonder if they ever had that Always Sunny meme happen with the inquisitorial representative to Iandon, though, or if indeed someone from Bael'Tan ever thought to visit Iandon to rekindle their alliance, only to see those space marines they thrashed so long ago just walking around next to the Wraith Guard. Probably not the thing to help Iandon and Bael'Tan come back together. Also, yes, this is in fact an Ultramarine success.
Why is the subathon paused? It's because early morning reacts, so I don't include that part of the subathon.
Chapter that routinely works with the Eldar. Are you perhaps starting to see why I've taken a liking to them?
He like elves.
In keeping with the record of something of note only happening every few thousand years to the swords of Ultramar, for a good long while they continued on as stated above.
Frog! Very happy frog. Very content frog. This frog's not dead, is it?
With problems located Macrog, maybe sometimes go on a joint venture with Crafter Iandon. Fun times all around, and given 40k being what it is, they should be thanking their lucky stars for it. Quietly doing your job in the background is the best thing that can happen to anyone in this setting, because when the narrative focuses on you, things are about to go horribly bad. And wouldn't you believe it, remember how I said they fought Tyranids at the beginning of the video? And did you happen to catch how I just transitioned the video to M41? The Swords of Ultramar, much like their parent chapter, Ultramar itself and Macragge, did not have a good time of things as M41 drew on. The First Tyrannic War and the invasion of Hive Fleet Behemoth ravaged the most prestigious of first founding chapters, and the Swords of Ultramar for their part were just as poorly off. In some ways even worse, actually. Now I will never, ever, ever criticize someone, be it a real person playing a video game or a fictional character, for preferring to move their forces around in one giant death blob. I do it all the time. I respect the hustle. But it does mean that if the death blob runs into something equivalent to it, you only have the option of fight or die. Even worse is that as a fleet-based chapter, all the things that let them keep being a chapter are in the same spot as the death blob. First contact with Behemoth came not long after the Hive Fleet overran the planet of Tyran that would give the species its name. Any messages they were receiving from the Imperium at large suddenly went silent, and their astropaths, well, no one knew what the Tyranids were yet. So from their point of view, astropaths sending messages suddenly started screaming about too many voices and not being able to drown out all the chittering in their brains. To someone not familiar with the shadow of the warp, this probably sounds like chaos corruption. Most of the astropaths were therefore executed, and the few remaining ones told to go their version of radio silent. I'm sure they were thankful for that, and also not being shot. Astropaths potentially being corrupted is not so much of an issue, however, compared to an entire Hive Fleet bearing down on you. The Swords of Ultramar put up a valiant fight, and since the entire chapter was located here, they were able to give as good as they got against the Tyranids. Large hive ship organisms were destroyed by the ships, and the Tyranids bloodied, and boarding actions of Nids sent packing in wave after wave of brutal combat as Astartes and Chapter Surf alike fought for their.
So is this a moment of the Blue Boys won, even though they shouldn't have won kind of moment?
Against a foe no one had ever seen before, not and lived to tell the tale about it. No one had encountered this enemy, however, or no one knew how to properly fight the Tyranids, and this was Hive Fleet Behemoth, one of the great Tyranids' hive fleets. The swords were very quickly put on the back foot, and the order to retreat was given. The Imperium had to know about what was coming, and perhaps had things gone better for them, they could have warned Macragge and the Ultramarines of the threat well before it got to where it ultimately did. But, you know, shadow in the warp. You can jump into the warp during this, but your navigators are flying blind and the warp is going to be all churned up and violent. Once again, the Swords of Ultramar were decimated by Xeno's forces, and their retreat to what would hopefully be Macragge or somewhere close to it went near as wrong as it possibly could have. Rather than promptly jumping to Ultramar, they were instead lost in the warp for a few hundred years. Given they would emerge relatively unscathed, only losing a few additional ships in the process, it would seem we have one of those instances of warp travel being near instant for them, but centuries passing in the real world around them. They ended up in the galactic northwest into a new world, the Era Indomitus. Once again reduced to a few hundred marines after Behemoth's assault, they get the added benefits of now their navigators still can't see shit. They're almost entirely across the galaxy from their home, and because they were stuck in hell for a few centuries, they missed out on getting any fancy pants Primaris reinforcements. And because when it rains it pours, they exited the warp in the Stygian sector around the planet Mordian. You may have
I have a feeling. Oh god, they're near Cadia. Oh.
heard of it. It's where the Mordian Iron Guard are from. Cool guys, those Mordians. Oh, and they were also just in time for the Thousand Suns to show up and try and integrate it into their own little real space empire. Fun fact, one of those supply ships they lost during warp transit,
Let's go.
turns out it accidentally T-boned a ritual being done by a warband of Thousand Suns in preparation for their various invasions. Ruined the whole thing and killed not only a good chunk of the sorcerers present, but got
How did I call that the guy that has multiple of himself would show up? How did I call that? Hold on. You need more proof that I'm omniscient. Omniscient? Omniscient. Omniscient! That word. Why does his cloak have eyes? That's gross. Cuts up.
marine dust all over the place. So the Thousand Sons who managed to put 2 and 2 together when they invaded Mordia saw these poor Ultramarine successors and jumped them. The fighting was fierce and near non-stop, and the Mordian front was yet another series of brutal battles for them. The Iron Hands and their successors eventually showing up helped stem the tide of Tzeentch demons, but during this affair Craftworld Ulthway also advised the Mordians to be anywhere but their present location, and this was something that at least the Swords of Ultramar took note of. They fought various rearguard actions to help regrouping Mordians on the way out. They didn't just up and leave, they aren't the Dark Angels, but they did nonetheless pull away, and for a stroke of luck they've been missing out on for some time, managed to successfully do so. The Guilliman's honor even survived the entire affair, so their reserves of basically everything, while depleted, aren't totally destroyed. Ever since, they've been slowly regathering their strength and working their way back towards Ultramar across the Imperium Nihilus.
So they've been slowly going back home, while killing everything on their way. Very blue boy.
Reinforcements did indeed come eventually, and an entire Space Marine chapter showing up out of nowhere, even if it was depleted, was certainly appreciated by the denizens of those regions of space. Now that Guilliman's back, they seem intent on joining his efforts to make Ultramar once again the full 500 world, since that was their whole thing, and they'd like to at least get in on the action now that it's a project for the whole Ultramarines family. The Swords of Ultramar are about as standard as one can get when it comes to organization. Classic Codex compliant stuff. 10 companies, all organized into various tactical and assault and what have you squads. They didn't feel like breaking the mold.
They will get home by some Christmas in the future. That's messed up.
Much as far as that
No!
goes. Quite frankly, there was no need to. Deciding to deploy themselves at full chapter strength after Baal Tan gave them the old 1-2 buckle my shoe was plenty enough variance from how things are normally done. Plus, the Codex was only mandatory as far as limiting chapter sizes goes. Guilliman couldn't give a damn how you handle your internal affairs as long as you don't go above the limit. The Swords just figured he probably knew what he was talking about when he laid everything out the way he did, and went along with what by the time of their founding was likely ancient history by that point. As for their color scheme, well, I can actually show that off quite easily. Thank you Space Marine 2 Character Customizer for making it wonderfully simple to showcase these things. Most of their armor is Temple Guard Blue, a nice shade of blue turquoise. Their right pauldron, however, is Macrog Blue, in honor of their parent chapter and Gene Father. Perhaps a sign of a bit of potential Legion building going on, but by M42, I don't think any authorities in charge are gonna care that much. The Inquisition has bigger things to worry about. Their chapter imagery, a simple sword, is Mephiston red, because Warhammer is not a subtle setting, and the blood of Macrog's enemies coats the sword's blades at all times. Although sometimes it is their own blood, to be honest with you. Most of their trimmed bits, you know, the edges of the
So they're the blue boys that roll ones.
Pauldrons and whatnot, is Grey Seer, though any proper finery such as the fancy skull with the wings you can see here should be Volopus Pink. If you're jamming a human skull made out of metal on your armor, you might as well have it stand out as a nice lightish red after all. And, plus, it means when you're covered in blood, the finery won't have its color distorted too much. And then of course from there, the Marines are all decked out in whatever random purity seals and other crap you can find on Marines, based on how cool a given one of them might happen to be. The 6-7 was my doing, however. That's not a chapter tradition or
Good
anything.
job.
I went a little rogue in the character customizer and found out you could do that. I'm not.
For shame! Let your name be shame, Pancreas! Nah, I love you. You're cute. Shaketh my head. All of Ultramarine is like has their head in their hands. They're like, why? Why would you do this to us?
Not changing it. Look at it.
Why would you do this to us?
Gaze upon my work.
He's pushing it further!
In despair. So then, you might be wondering, where else can I find information on these guys? This was a fairly abridged summary of a chapter's history after all. Where else
Fairly abridged.
can you learn about them? Well, you see, dear viewer, this video. This is the only source of lore on them, because I made them up. This is an entirely homebrew chapter I made up. I started making custom schemes in the Space Marine 2 Character Customizer, decided...
Guys, I hate you.
I quite like this one, and wrote
How
a bunch
dare
more
you
about
trick
them, which
me!
I just said to you now. But hey, that's the fun of Warhammer. If you don't have at least 10 pages of homebrew lore for your army, you gotta get on that. I'm just lucky enough to be able to share my fanfiction with more people than most before they realize it's fanfiction. And so with my little bit ended, that was the Swords of Ultramar. As real an army as you'd like them to be. Thank you once again to Focus Entertainment and Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2 for sponsoring this fanfiction. The Brigation update's out now, remember, so if you want to go get bodied by a Needle of the Vortex Beast in siege mode but with some fancy new toys to fight back with, now's the time. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members.
Pancreas, you haven't tricked me a lot, but you tricked me like twice, which isn't a lot. But I'll fight you.
Members, you were the homebrew to my 40k, bringing life and creativity to something that could always use more of it. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching and take care out there.
Yeah. The thing is, the lore was decent. It was actually really decent. That's why I was convinced it was real for a bit. I didn't even think that it might be fake. I'll fight all of you. I'll fight all of you. So many people.
Pro tip for playing Space Marine 2, find people who are better than you at the game to carry you. I think absolute difficulty is easy as can be when it doesn't matter if I'm actually alive or not and can reap all the experience and rewards anyways. It's a great time. Incidentally, thank you Froggy PhD for carrying me through so many missions on account of my incredible lack of skill.
Now just imagine he used his powers of gaslighting for evil.
Do we hire him to gaslight the world into letting Boka own it? Do we? Do we do that? I think we do. I like Pancreas. Give him a like or follow. No, I did not say if you like it. Do it. If you like me, give me a like and follow. Not that I care anything. Smoke bomba.